It's 10 a.m. We're going to start on time. The recording has already started, and I'll do my best to let people in from the waiting room. Welcome to our second webinar this summer, which was something I presented at Inspire. So if you were unable to join us there or make it to my session on this time frame, we're having this virtual learning opportunity now. This session is on grammar instruction and secondary ELA, crafting and combining sentences. So I'm going to put this bit.ly link in the chat for you really quick. This is a way that we capture attendance for all of our offerings of webinars. So right here in the chat is that bit.ly link. It should take you to a quick little form to indicate that you are attending today. And Shanda, I'm looking in the chat now. It is totally okay that your computer you're using today doesn't have a camera. I'm just glad that you're here. So yeah, if you all will click on that bit.ly link, it's going to look like this, a quick little Google form. The subject area is going to be English language arts. We want your name or email if you can, the district you're with, and so on. The event can just be summer webinar or webinar. So we'll do a quick little housekeeping here for the next 30 seconds. Sure appreciate you taking attendance. At the end of our time today, we're going to fill out a different form, and it will allow you to evaluate me and our time together. You can be anonymous or not on that. And then when you're finished with the evaluation, you should receive a blank PD certificate. But in experimenting with that last week, we had some people have trouble downloading or keeping that certificate. So I'm also going to try to just email it out to all of you after our time together today. That email will probably come in the afternoon. So you can continue to take attendance, but let's proceed with our webinar time. Hopefully you're still seeing my screen. Some other upcoming professional learning opportunities. Next week, July 22nd, there will be another webinar, Prefixes and Suffixes and Roots, oh my, supporting striving adolescent readers, talking about morphology in grades 6 through 12. And then July 28th will be about crafting a creative writing course. If you teach that high school English elective. Then I'll be leading fall regional workshops around the state, starting at the end of September and going through October. Depending on your region, please attend. The links for this will be available in my August newsletter. The topic will be generative artificial intelligence in the English classroom. I did a 1-hour workshop on that last week. This will be a 3-hour deeper dive. And then I probably will offer a 1-hour, maybe a 90-minute version of that fall regional workshop. We shall see. Okay, so that's enough advertisement from me and what I've got going on. Let's get to the task at hand, or the webinar or topic at hand. This description maybe lured you here today, that striving adolescent writers need explicit instruction to address their literacy needs. We are going to learn some evidence-based practices for teaching students how to imitate mentor sentences and how to combine simple sentences into compound and complex sentences. And we're actually going to start with something a little bit even more accessible to all, which is sentence frames. So we're going to identify some of these strategies that help our adolescent writers at various stages of their writing development, and then determine which ones you would like to use with your students and how often. I've already said my name. I'm Jason Stevenson. I'm the Program Manager of Secondary Education at the OSDE. Always feel free to reach out to me through email or a phone call, and I'll do my best to assist you. I've been in this role since 2018. So we're going to talk about these different scaffolds today for helping our adolescent writers write better sentences. And we'll start with sentence frames, move on to sentence combination, and then conclude with sentence imitation. And I want to check my screen really quick, and we're going to admit our people into the Zoom here. Okie doke. So yeah, sentence frames are when most of the language of a sentence is provided by a teacher, we might think of them as fancy Mad Libs. Students get to decide how to fill in the blanks. This can help support writing as well as discussions that we have in our classrooms, and all learners benefit from this approach. Our English learners, our students with language difficulties, and more times than not, our elementary counterparts in English language arts are probably more familiar and more comfortable using sentence frames. But we're going to look at them in more of a secondary context today. And I think it's maybe best if we start with watching a video of sentence frames in action. This is a younger crowd in the video. I think I grabbed this from, I don't know if it was Reading Rockets or Edutopia. I think it was an Edutopia article. But I should be able to share sound and video. I went to our IT desk earlier this morning. So let's see if this will work. Oh, you know what? I bet you can't hear it, can you? I'm going to try again. And when I share my screen this time, I have to click a button to share my sound. All right. Second chance. Here we go.
What is the author's viewpoint about exploring?
A sentence frame is a strategy that I use, especially for my English language learners, to give them an opportunity to answer a question. It's basically the setup of a sentence with a piece missing from it so that they can fill in the information. I've taken a part of the job of writing away from the student so they can focus on the content.
If you were going to fill in this sentence, how would you fill it in? The author thinks exploring is...
I think it's exciting because you could find out new stuff about different things you never knew about.
I write the sentence frames on sentence strips to help provide the students with the language that I'd like to hear them using when they're talking about the answer and writing about the answer.
How does the author feel about Lewis and Clark? And in order to answer this question, you're going to have to prove it to me.
I think the author feels like that Lewis and Clark are very strong because they have to go through all these dangers and hazards, and then
the sentence frame especially help my English language learners because it gives them a structure for answering the questions. It helps all of my students be successful.
I think that Lewis and Clark were very brave because it says that Lewis considered the Mandan Indian stories about huge bears to be fanciful tales until one of the explorers was chased by a grizzly bear.
Do you think you would have enough proof to be able to say that the author feels that Lewis and Clark is brave?
The sentence frames help my students to understand what an answer might look like. For most of my students, I let them know that it's optional, but it gives students an option for starting so they're not staring at the paper, not knowing where to begin.
So I hope that video was helpful orientation for you or as a reminder of what sentence frames can look like in our classroom. Some of you may have used them before, and if you're able to, since we're on Zoom this week, last week we were on Teams, I think there's maybe an option for reactions, or maybe you could just say yes or no in the chat if you have yourself already used sentence frames with your students before. Or a thumbs up. Yeah, there's some of us are saying yes, we've used sentence frames before. I would love to hear from one or two of you what it's been like using sentence frames with your secondary students. And then I have my own ideas and guidance that I'll be sharing in a moment. But anyone who's willing to come off mute or wants to share something in the chat about that, please do so now. We can virtually raise our hand or we can just dive in. Anyone willing to share what sentence frames are like in your classroom? Minimally, Rebecca says. You've got some yeses.
I tend to use it for like Socratic seminars, Socratic discussion type, where there's not really a starting point, but that way there's basically like a framework for where students should be starting compared to where they want, where they should end up.
Great. So during Socratic seminar, kind of a starting point, it gives them a basis and they don't have to use it. They can if they want to. Great.
It also models positive interaction between each other as well.
Excellent. Those important speaking and listening skills that are in standard 1. Helen says she uses them every day for her English learner students. Shay out in Piedmont says they provided students with a language of response handout for literature circles at the secondary level. And then Holly's saying that sentence frames have helped her secondary students begin writing instead of just staring at the paper. It gives them a direction, and then they can maybe build on that and go from there without needing a sentence frame for every single sentence. Nikki's saying sometimes for essays, sentence frames are helpful, but especially that argumentative mode. And I have some special advanced sentence frames for argumentative that we can look at in a little bit. And then Erica is saying using them in graphic organizers for writing. So anyone else want to come off mute and quickly share on what sentence frames are like in your class? It sounds like we can kind of speed through this portion of the slideshow because you all know about them already and are using them effectively in various ways. Stacy's also saying that on the Newsella website, students can use sentence frames there to help them. So let's get into it just a little bit more in this slide deck I have prepared on sentence frames. That if you've never used them before, and after all of these people sharing that they use them, it'd probably be a little scary to speak up and say, I've never used them. I don't know where to start. So this is for you. You should first identify the skill or the content that you wish to target, and then you can develop sentence frames that support that goal. Can do it all by yourself. If you attended my webinar last week, you maybe want to use a large language model, ChatGPT or otherwise, to maybe help you develop some sentence frames. And there's lots of them that already exist on the internet. And then you could also differentiate your sentence frames by proficiency level. And let's look at an example of that. So these are differentiated sentence frames to help a student describe a main character in a story. And they're written at an emerging, a developing, and then an expanding level. So it might be something very basic, like she is blank and blank, getting students to use at least 2 adjectives to describe the protagonist. At the developing level, we might ask our students to justify their reasoning and say why. They could list the name of the main character, give a quality, but then also say why. So that's what that developing frame is doing. And then at the expanding level, we're having our students explain even a little bit more when the protagonist took this particular action. That would be a verb phrase there. We would say what that revealed about the character. She revealed tenacity. She revealed courage. She revealed any number of qualities. And then they could continue to analyze. So this would be the highest level of sentence frame. So if you're a little hesitant or think, this really would make writing too easy, or my students need to make all these choices, sentence frames can be constructed in such a way that they are differentiated for all types of writers. So during the actual instruction and introducing sentence frames to your students, if they've never used them before, or maybe at the start of the year when they're using them in your class for the first time, because maybe sentence frames were used a little bit differently in the grade before, you'll want to introduce them to your students, explain to them how you want them to use the frames, and then model for them. Show them how to use them. Put it up on the board, whether it's a chalkboard, marker board, a screen, projector, and work through a few on your own. Have students help you as kind of a whole group thing, and then have students maybe work in partners or in small groups, and then have them work also on their own so that they're having plenty of practice with those sentence frames so they feel confident later on when they're doing that on their own. Another way to group sentence frames is the text structure that you're having students write in. So it might be that you're giving them sentence frames for analysis, or if they're writing about something sequentially in an informative text, something for cause and effect, or compare and contrast. So if you are one of those teachers that has students maintain a notebook where they keep track of different frames, then they could group them by these types. And so that would let students practice and get comfortable using the different text structures with these frames. And then once you have finished instruction and students are pretty used to using sentence frames, you could post them on the wall or the class website and provide students with printed versions if you wanted to, or maybe it's just a digital version, and then refer back to them throughout the year, throughout the unit, throughout the semester, and celebrate when students use them. And then as the year progresses, this would be a scaffold that we would want to remove over time as students gain more proficiency in writing and maybe don't need those frames as much in May as they did in September. And then a few other best practices with sentence frames. It's letting students choose to use them or not. They may not want to. They may want to try their own way of expressing themselves, using their own structures, writing their own sentences. And in my view, that would be perfectly okay. But some students need them. But I wouldn't mandate their usage. I would not give a grade on you used a sentence frame or not, because some students need them, some don't. And then provide sentence frames during discussions. Jason beat me to the punch earlier, so did Shay, saying that they use sentence frames to help students during whole class discussions of a text to support more academic language or complex sentence structures. And just to kind of put a finer detail on things, sometimes instead of sentence frames during discussions, we might use sentence starters. So really, it's just like there's a blank at the end of the sentence, but you're giving students the opening words or phrase during a discussion. So if they're supposed to be clarifying something one of their classmates said, the start of the question would be, what do you mean, ... fill in the blank. Can you explain what you meant by such, and so on. So you could even post a poster like this on the wall, have it displayed digitally, give it to students as a handout, etc. But just sort of a different version of sentence frames are these sentence starters used during whole class discussions, which can be super helpful. I've been talking at you a lot. If we were in a in-person setting, at this point, I'd want you all to like turn and talk and share what your thoughts are so far. But we'll just have to do that whole group because breakout rooms can be kind of tough, I have found. So are there any questions? Are there any comments, any aha moments, anything else to add about sentence frames or these sentence starters that we've talked about? Feeling pretty comfortable or confident with them, I hope. Can I get a story from someone who did not use sentence frames at first and then they tried it and what that was like? Could anyone share a story like that? I don't remember using sentence frames when I was a student, and maybe we did and I just have lost the memory. Elaine says it's a good way to introduce more formal academic language. Excellent. Okay, I tried. My wait time's pretty good sometimes, but I'm anxious to move along, so we'll move along. It's also a good idea later on in the school year, or if you've got older students, high schoolers, to use open sentence frames so that students have options for completion It's sort of that more advanced sentence frame that we looked at already. I got this idea from a book called Universal Design for Learning in English Language Arts. And in this book, they described closed frames and open frames. So closed sentence frames are highly structured, usually only prompting for just a single word or a short phrase, and it may appear as limiting. Some students maybe need more closed frames early on in the year, as applied to the book The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. It might be something like, in the novel The Hate You Give, the character blank changed from being blank to being blank. So they're picking one character from the story and they're picking two qualities and how they changed. So there's still a little bit of choice in this frame because they don't have to write about the protagonist. They're still getting to choose one of the characters from that book. But it is a fairly basic sentence. Open frames, on the other hand, they have that structure and support, but there's more room for creativity. There's longer phrases that students would have to write. There's more analysis. So expanding beyond single text and letting students choose whatever novel they might want to do, like Shea and Piedmont, their teachers use literature circles at the high school level. So a frame for that unit might be, in the novel blank, the character blank demonstrated blank when blank. And so there'd be a little more analysis there. So that's the difference between closed and open frames, another way of thinking about sentence frames, that the longer the school year goes on, you probably want to have fewer closed frames and more open frames for your students. Also, by the way, I will make sure and share all these slideshows and this slideshow and all its associated resources with you once our time is done today. So if you're taking notes, great, but also be assured you're going to get the slides. Here are these advanced sentence frames for argument writing at the high school level. So even secondary students writing at a high level might benefit from advanced sentence frames. This resource has been around for a number of years now. It's in its 6th edition. I have the 5th edition on my shelf just right back here, called They Say, I Say, The Moves That Matter in Academic Writing. And I'll show you a PDF of a lot of these frames in just a moment, but here is one highly complex series of sentence frames for writing an argument. In discussions of X, we'll say school uniforms because that is the cliche topic that we talk about for argument writing. And discussions of school uniforms, one controversial issue has been the cost. On one hand, I don't know, someone argues this side of the issue. On the other hand, another individual or organization contends, students should have their autonomy. Others even maintain, it builds school culture. My own view is da-da-da. So we're getting lots of different points of view in this structure. So I nabbed these They Say, I Say templates from the Kentucky Writing Project's website, which I don't know copyright wise how legal this is that they've uploaded all of these, but it's a 9-page document that has all of these different structures of introducing standard views, maintaining what they say, something you say. I've always believed that. When I was a child, I used to think that. Introducing something implied or assumed, introducing an ongoing debate. This is what I grabbed for the slide deck, this little one right here. And so I hope you're seeing the power of sentence frames, that they are not just something for elementary students. They're not even something just for middle school, but they could even be used at the high school level, especially when working with argument writing. If we were in person, we could have had this entire packet printed out into different chunks. I could have given each group of people a different section, like agreeing, but with a difference. I agree that blank because my experience blank confirms it. Or X's theory of blank is extremely useful because it sheds insight on the difficult problem of blank. So actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen I'll let you all drive. So in the chat is the link to that long handout. And so I'm going to give you a minute or two to poke around in it, look at those different sections. They have signal phrase structures, naming your naysayers in an argument, indicating who cares, establishing why your claims matter. And then on pages 8 and 9 are commonly used transitions organized by their intent, whether it's elaboration, contrast, conclusion, cause and effect, etc. But I'm not sharing my screen. You all should be able to pull up that PDF right now and poke around for at least a little bit and see what you think. So what is, if at any points anything's bubbling to the surface, you've got questions, comments, aha moments that you'd like to share, please do. We learn better together. Oh, and Shay already found it for me. Thanks, Shay. So right now we are reviewing some of these they say, I say sentence frames for writing an argument at probably a high school level. Maybe these could be adapted for 8th grade, or some could be used in middle school. Savannah, excellent point. She says this is a great way to take some writing anxiety away from our students with special needs. I absolutely agree with you. And these commonly used transitions that Elaine is pointing out on these final 2 pages, I think those could be used across the board, secondary wise. Okay, any other thoughts or comments on this resource? We are going to get to it in just a moment, but I'll just say now, maybe there's a temptation to have this entire packet available to students at the very beginning of an argument writing unit, but I think this would overwhelm them. I think what you would want to do is bring out each little section on its own as you're teaching students. Okay, we're going to talk about how to introduce quotations, and that's on pages 3 and 4, and we're going to focus just on those today, and not just throwing all these frames at them and say, good luck, I've given you all these frames, you're on your own. We wouldn't want to do that. Okay. Jason says it's great for pre-writing and planning. Absolutely. Let me share my screen again. Share. Slideshow. Moving right along. Okay, that's it. We're ready to move on. I thought I did have a slide that talked about not overwhelming students with all the frames at once, but I just said it. So hopefully you take that to heart. Next up, we are done with sentence frames. We're going to talk about sentence combination next, and we're doing great on time. In sentence combination, students consolidate information from 2 or more simple sentences into a single sentence. They still need to use all the information that's present in the 2 or 3, or I don't even know if you'd want to do 4 sentences, but they should eliminate redundancies, still maintain the meaning. By doing this, students are learning different ways that sentences can be formed, can be combined. They learn about syntax, they learn about conjunctions, how clauses work, and then the hope is that this varied sentence structure finds its way into their own writing, where they're no longer relying on simple sentences for everything. So students with language learning disabilities really do benefit from sentence combining. English learners do. Middle school students can really benefit, and even high school. The research that I've done on this indicates that it's kind of helpful across the board. And some of you may already use sentence combining as a strategy that you teach your students for Standard 5 language. So you can target these different language rules from our Oklahoma academic standards through sentence combining, whether it is the placement of a comma, conjunction use, using compound subjects or predicates, phrase placement. So sentence combining is pretty versatile in that way. So the way to teach it, first you want to identify which skill from the Oklahoma Academic Standards you're wanting to teach. So just dip into Standard 5 language, see which grammar expectation you're wanting to teach your students, and then you'll develop a set of exercises of simple sentences that students would then combine. You could target science or social studies topics that are from the standards of the grade that you teach, if you wanted to talk to any colleagues on that, or you could just target sentences from fiction or nonfiction literature, whether it's mentor text, an upcoming novel unit, a past novel unit, and so on. And then you will, just like you did with the sentence frames, explicitly model for your students sentence combining techniques, show them how it works, provide some guided practice for them so that they're doing it alongside you as a whole group, and then they would work maybe with a partner or a small group and eventually on their own so that they get more comfortable and confident in combining sentences. This whole approach of I do, we do, you do, which you've probably heard this many, many times if you've taught for even a year or two, has its basis in real research. It's not just something that got passed down as a secret. The IES practice guide for teaching secondary students to write effectively talks on page 19 about this particular effective teaching cycle, that the teacher goes first as a model, then there is whole group practice or maybe peer practice, and then eventually students reflect on the strategy and use it on their own. If you want this entire guide, it is linked in our slide deck today, Teaching Secondary Students to Write Effectively. It is a little old at this point, but there's still a lot of great resources and recommendations, and that's where this model practice reflect cycle is further explained. But back to the slideshow at hand, because I'm ready to show you some of these exercises. Whenever you develop out some of these sentence combining exercises, you will list the base clause first, the main clause that students are going to be adding on to, and then the modifying sentence would come next. If you feel your students need a cue or a clue, because I've seen it called both, you could then bold or underline or use a different color to indicate in that modifying sentence the information students are supposed to keep when they combine. This will make so much more sense with an example. So let's get to it. Here would be the base clause first. The students played during recess. This is a simple sentence. And then if we had the students were energetic as the second sentence. This one's got the cue or clue because it's black, it's bold. That means to our student writers, I need to maintain that information when I combine these two sentences into one, but also I can get rid of redundancy. So if I were teaching this to my sixth graders, for instance, I might highlight the commonalities between the two sentences and say, you know, who sees repetition here? Where is it? Okay, it's the students. So we don't need the students twice. Whenever we combine this sentence, we probably would not say the students played during recess and the students were energetic. It's redundant. So we're going to strike through the second piece of information there that's in that second sentence. And then I would probably ask my students, okay, if I want to add energetic to the first sentence, where would it go? Would I put it, you know, before the? Would I put it before students? Would I put it before played? Would I put it before recess? Turn and talk to your neighbor about where you think it goes and why, and then we would have a discussion about the fact that energetic is an adjective, it modifies a noun, and usually adjectives go before the noun. So the complete sentence is going to be the energetic students played during recess. Now, this is pretty basic, but if you want to make this more advanced, kick it up a notch for your high school students, or if this is just way below where your middle school students are and you want something more complicated, that can definitely be that can definitely happen. We can definitely do that. Another instance would be if you want to give a conjunction to your students or not, you could provide that in a parentheses at the end. So here's our base sentence again. The student spilled coffee on her shirt. The lid was on loose. And then if we want to signal to our students, the way we're going to combine these two sentences is with this conjunction because. Then they could use that to help them put the sentence together. So it might look like the student spilled coffee on her shirt because the lid was on loose. That's really all students are having to do is move that because. Now, if you want it to be extra, like some students say, you could shift things around and move the second sentence into the beginning of the sentence and say the loose lid caused the student to spill coffee on her shirt, just so that students are seeing there's more than one way to combine sentences. But that doesn't follow the rules, and depending on your students, they may or may not like that. Now, you could remove those scaffolds, the cues and clues, as time goes on, after students have had enough practice with sentence combining, and then that will allow them to grow as a writer, because they would then have to determine what it is they want to combine and add together. And then you could create more than 2 kernel sentences. Once students can easily combine 2 simple sentences. And by kernel sentence, I just mean the basic sentence that students are using to combine. So giving them 3 simple sentences, for instance, such as this. The day was sunny. The girls played soccer. It was the big game. So you could combine these sentences in a number of ways. They don't have to stay in the same order. You're going to try to get rid of redundancy. And it can be a challenge to your students to see, can you figure out, 2 ways to combine these sentences instead of just 1? Could they even figure out 3 different ways to combine all of this information? And I hope you've had your coffee, because we're going to do a little challenge right now. So don't put your answer in the chat yet, because that will give away the fun. But I'd like you in the chat box to combine all 3 of these sentences into 1 sentence. And then in a moment, I'm going to say go, and then everyone's going to post their sentence at once. And then you'll see all the different varieties. So I'll be quiet so you all can think and get all 3 of these sentences combined. Once your answers are in the chat, I have 3 different versions prepared already on the slideshow. I guess the badge of honor would be if you can think of a way to combine these sentences that I have not already highlighted on the slideshow, if you're an overachiever. So get your combined sentence ready in the chat. Don't post it yet, and we'll all post it once in just a second. Do we need more time? It's really hard to tell. Are we good? Yeah, we're good. We're ready. Okay, everyone post on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3, go. Bam, bam, bam. Okay. So I keep saying I'm going to be quiet, but I keep talking. It's a problem. You can scroll through the chat and see what people said. You know what you wrote. Here are 3 different versions that I have prepared. The girls played soccer in the big game on a sunny day. There'd be 1 option. So the sunny day from that first bullet gets moved to the end in this option. The girls playing soccer, the second bullet gets moved to the beginning, and then the big game gets moved to the middle. Here's another version. On a sunny day, the girls played soccer in the big game. So in this case, I changed wording just a little bit. Instead of saying the day was sunny, I changed that phrasing to on a sunny day. We could get into the weeds with our students or argue, like, does that maintain meaning or not? I would argue it does. And that if I'm wanting to combine sentences, I can have that freedom to kind of tweak the language. Here's the 3rd option I came up with. The sun shone as the girls played soccer in the big game. Once again, I tweaked that language of the day was sunny and changed it to an action verb. So instead of using the adjective sunny, now I'm getting to use an action verb of shown, and so on. So hopefully you're seeing the power of sentence combining. Here's another way to go about it, is to take more complex sentences from a text you're already studying or have studied, or are going to study. And I chose The Great Gatsby because it's 100 years old and out of copyright. So the full text is available online. And I nabbed this sentence from chapter 5. Before I could answer, Daisy came out of the house, and 2 rows of brass buttons on her dress gleamed in the sunlight. And so I want to then break this down into kernel sentences. And that would look like, before I could answer, Daisy came out of the house. 2 rows of brass buttons on her dress gleamed in the sunlight. And then I could ask students and present them the 2 kernel sentences. How would you combine these 2 sentences into one? And then once they are finished, I could show them how F. Scott Fitzgerald did it in The Great Gatsby. If I wanted to, I could prompt them and give them the coordinating conjunction, but I would think most high school students would not need to be told you need to use and to combine these. But you could give it to them if you wanted to. Here's one other example of that. This is from chapter 1 of The Great Gatsby. Her gray, sun-strained eyes looked back at me with polite reciprocal curiosity out of a wan, charming, discontented face. Got a lot of information in this sentence. So you could make kernel sentences like this. Her eyes looked back at me with polite reciprocal curiosity out of a face, which sounds silly a bit. But then we could add, her eyes were gray and sun-strained. Her face was wan, charming, and discontented. There's a lot going on in this sentence. So if you want to kernel it out, you could. And so if you wanted to give it with cues, you could. You wouldn't have to, but then you could challenge your students to put it all back together. So it's kind of reverse engineering. If you're wanting to use mentor text instead of creating things out of nowhere, using a large language model to help you with these kernel sentences. So resources connected to sentence combining. There's an intensive intervention practice guide published in 2021 that is about explicit instruction in sentence combining for struggling writers. That one is right here. This is linked from the notes section of the slideshow. I got some of my information from that resource for this section. The Writing Next report was published in 2007, and it identifies 11 elements of current writing instruction found to be effective for helping adolescent writers. And one of those 11 elements is sentence combining, and it's got an effect size of 0.5. If you know anything about effect size, it's pretty good. So there's research to back up this sentence combining strategy. And then there's also a book that I've identified called Literacy Intervention in the Middle Grades for targeting grades 4 through 8. And it has some information and rationale for using sentence combining as well. So that brings us to the end of our second section. We still have sentence imitation to get into, but are there any comments, questions, concerns about sentence combining before we move on? If you were forced to make a choice right now, do you think you would use sentence frames more or sentence combining more in your class? Or based on what you've already done in the past, which one do you tend to use more with your students? Sentence frames or sentence combining? Anyone have an answer to that question? Sentence frames for 6th graders. Someone else said sentence combining. All right, we've already got 2 different answers. Any other thoughts?
I tend to use the frames a lot more when writing essays, but just listening to you talk, and I have several books on the combining as well. I'm thinking I would really like to start using the sentence combining more.
Yeah, introduce it a little bit more, try it out and see how it goes. I'd love to know. Great. Um, Autumn was saying she uses sentence combining more because her high schoolers tend to write in those short, choppy sentences like we were looking at. So challenging them to combine can really beef up their syntax skills. All right, let me share my screen again. We're going to look at the final strategy today, which is sentence imitation. So in sentence imitation, students are presented with a mentor sentence. They break it down into parts and then they write a similar sentence of their own. You can nab mentor sentences from any number of resources, whether it's a published author, a text that you've already studied or read in your class. You as the teacher could write some mentor sentences that you want students to imitate. And then if you want to hold on to student writing from the current year or past years, then you can also use those as sentences. So the steps you take whenever students are imitating a sentence, a mentor sentence, is step one, they need to notice. So students are reading the sentence and they're looking for interesting techniques that the writer used, a structure they used, a particular piece of punctuation that you're wanting to highlight, or so on. And it might be that what you want students to notice in a mentor sentence, they totally miss it and they fixate on something else. And if that's still worthy of study and imitation, let them go in that direction. Let it be a little more student directed. And then we're going to go on to step two after noticing. And then students choose something from that mentor sentence that they want to borrow and use in a sentence of their own. So they get to tinker and play with language. Low stakes kind of thing. Maybe it's in their writer's notebook. And then kind of like the grand hope is application. Step three, that in an authentic piece of writing, students begin to incorporate some of these techniques. Some of these techniques might have very specific names, like using a semicolon correctly. I'm going to present you a mentor sentence that's got a semicolon in it. Now you're going to use it, bam. But there might be other instances where we don't have an exact word or phrase for what it is students are noticing. And that can be where the fun comes in, because you as the teacher or they as a class could come up with a name or a phrase to describe what it is the writer was doing in that particular sentence. So in a book that is now 10 years old, and I remember when it was first published and reading it through and marking it up, called Writing with Mentors by Allison Marchetti and Rebecca Odell, they say the real power of mentor texts lies in the teacher whose habit of mind is tuned to the needs of student writers and searches for the mentor text to meet those needs. Now, there's lots of mentor texts out there already. You could certainly use text from your textbook to make things go faster. But whenever you find a really nice sentence, it's I think it'd be a great idea to kind of keep those in a safe space, a Google Drive, a Google Doc, a repository that you could pull from. So we would want to align any of these mentor texts to our standards. And what we're looking at today is sentences only, but eventually you can incorporate mentor paragraphs and even full-blown mentor essays or mentor texts so that students can see the writing all the way through. But focusing just on sentences is a nice way to start for students who are more striving. I'm here to tell you one of the best books I read last year was Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner, who is the lead singer of a band called Japanese Breakfast, who is coming to Oklahoma City later this year at the Criterion. But it is on a school night, heads up. She won an essay contest sponsored by Glamour magazine back in 2016 called Real Life, Love, Loss, and Kimchi. And she was able to convert that essay win into a book deal where she elaborated on the topic, which was losing her mother and processing that grief. H Mart is an Asian grocery store, not found in Oklahoma, but in other large cities. I think there is one in Dallas, and I've been to the one in New York City. So real quick, I think I have it queued up here. Here's the essay that's still around. There she is in her Brooklyn apartment. And then there's another picture of her as a child with her mom. That's Michelle on the right. So the Glamour website has all of this, all these ads. I have a Google Doc of just the words themselves if you want that. But what I've done here on this slideshow is pulled some of Michelle's excellent sentences from that award-winning essay, and I've tied them to different objectives from Standard 5 language that I could then use to teach to my students. So here's a 7th grade skill of students will use commas to separate words or phrases in a series, and it's highlighted in this sentence. My kitchen filled with jars containing cabbage, cucumbers, and radishes in various stages of fermentation. Now, if you're like me, then you're also converting your students into users of the Oxford comma. And this sentence does a good job of including an Oxford comma. So if you want to teach that to your students, that's going above and beyond what this standard is asking for. But we could show this sentence to our students, ask them what they notice about the punctuation of the list, and then have them write their own sentence that includes a list as well, using the commas to separate the words or phrases. So that was pretty straightforward. Here's another example from her essay of what I think is a mentor sentence, a well-written sentence, and it aligns to a skill from 9th grade, 95W7. Students will use commas to set off simple parenthetical elements. It's a little abstract, thinking about what is a simple parenthetical element. I'll tell you in a moment how I decided in a positive is one of those things. But here's the sentence. When I came home from college, my mom used to make galbi sam, Korean short rib with lettuce wraps. Sounds pretty good. So galbi sam is the romanization of the Korean word for this meal. So spelled out in our English alphabet instead of the Hangul Korean alphabet. And then we get a definition for it, though. So that's pretty handy to have in a positive. It's an excellent time to use one. So that 95W7, I'm over in the ELA framework website. If you've not used it before, here's your invitation to do so. And every objective has an objective analysis that provides further guidance and details. And I believe there are people on this call, Erica, who have helped us develop out this framework in the past. So I believe we've got parenthetical elements defined here on this as information that is non-essential to the meaning of a sentence, examples, clarification, or an aside. And then we've got students will use commas to distinguish non-essential phrases. Mickey Mantle, the famous New York Yankee, was born and raised in Oklahoma. So there's a positive there. So that gives me confidence that I can use and a positive to align to 95W7 for teaching that skill to my students. Another example, and this is an example of something that's maybe not super direct, but it's still something interesting in a sentence that I'd want students to pick up on. Here's the sentence. Our table, once beautiful and unique, became a battleground of protein powders and tasteless porridge. I really like this sentence. This phrase, once beautiful and unique, that describes the table is something that does happen in our English language. We just don't always draw attention to it in our classes, perhaps. But this is an adjective phrase that comes after the noun instead of before. And at the late high school level, that stage in 11th and 12th grade, we have an objective that students will add clarity, variety, and style to their writing and presentations with parts of speech and various types of phrases and clauses. It keeps going. But you see here, sometimes you can move adjectives after the noun and it's super effective. This is also an instance where there's more than one thing to notice or point out in a sentence. Some of you are dying to say which literary element is also in this sentence. Anyone want to say it or put it in the chat? Do you see what else is going on in the sentence that's super cool? Someone take the bait? Yes, alliteration, Lindsay. Thank you. You took the answer right out of my mouth because we've got protein powders and porridge. That's excellent. Okay, this might be our last one. We'll go fast. We only have 5 minutes left. A semicolon usage at the 11th grade level. We've got an expectation that students will write using correct semicolon mechanics. Semicolons are introduced at the middle school level as well. So we have this explanation of Korean cuisine. Stews are served in heavy stone pots that hold the heat, semicolon. Crack an egg on top, and it will poach before your eyes. And then the other example sentence that has a semicolon, I moved back to Oregon to help my mother through chemotherapy. Over the next 4 months, I watched her slowly disappear. So one sentence a lot sadder than the other, but they're both using semicolons. Another thing that's interesting to point out, if we wanted to, maybe not to middle school students because they're still learning the rules, but maybe our high school students can break them with confidence. Look at the second half of the first sentence. It uses second person point of view. Crack an egg on top and it will poach before your eyes. Like that might be something that we discourage our younger writers from doing, but this is a grown-up adult writer who won the Glamour essay nationwide essay contest, and they totally broke the rules by shifting into a different point of view. And then dashes. I love a good dash. ChatGPT and other large language models are taking dashes away from us. They were trained on academic writing that apparently used a lot of dashes. And so now a signal to us as teachers that students may have used a large language model is a heavy use of dashes. But real humans, real writers also use dashes. And here's an example of that. And we do have dashes in our standards at the junior and senior level. There was nothing about me that felt Korean, except when it came to food. Or the treatment took everything. Her hair, her spirit, her appetite. This may just be enticing you to want to read the full essay or the book, and that's also my intention today. So there's also that. Another thing to point out about the second sentence that our students would probably notice if we have them turn and talk is look at that intentional repetition. Her, her, her. Why was it repeated? What is the effect? Okay, so you can do a lot with sentence imitation. There's the resource of writing with mentors. I wish we had more time together, just 5 more minutes, because we would have picked one of those sentences and we would have imitated something from one of those.